Hi, I'm Steve Cordle, and welcome to this edition of My Two Cents Worth. This is the part of my channel where I simply give you my 2 cents worth on a particular topic. But before we go much further, would you click on that subscribe bar and subscribe to the channel? And then when the notification bell pops up, click on it. You'll be notified anytime I add content to the channel. Comment on these videos, like these videos, share these videos. Hey, I can't grow the channel without the help of my loyal viewers, such as yourself. This particular edition of My 2 Cents Worth is brought to you by A Closer Walk with Jesus, published by 21st Century Christian Publishers in Nashville, Tennessee. It's the first book that they published for me. It's actually my second book overall, but it's a good study if you need something for your personal devotional every day or even a small group topic. There's lots of topics covered in here. A lot of them are kind of basics if you need to go over them, like what prayer is all about, what the plan of salvation is, and things like that. If you are in the Nashville area or if you're tech savvy and would like to order it online, here's the website for 21st Century Christian. And then if you're in the Nashville area, they are at 4108 Hillsborough Pike, Suite 200. They just moved there within the last year, so it's a new address for them. You can phone them at 615 383 3842 or toll free 800 251 2477 and fax at 615 292 5983. Customer service is open Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Central Time. The store hours are from 8:30 to 4:30 Monday through Thursday, and then 8:30 to 4 on Friday. And again, that's all Central Time. Or if you're really tech savvy and don't care to go to shops at all, you can always go to Amazon.com. Or if you have a local Christian bookstore or any kind of a local bookstore, go in there and order it. Ask them to carry it. All right, let's get on with this. I was going to do this in one video where I would talk about what's commonly known as progressive Christianity. And then as I got into this, I decided there's more to this than can be handled really in one video. So I'm going to be doing over time, probably once a month or maybe every 6 weeks or something like that. I will talk about a particular progressive Christian, and I should be doing air quotes, progressive Christian, and having a look at some of their doctrinal positions as it relates to real Christianity. Because what most people call progressive Christians is really regressive anti Christian. And by regressive, what I'm getting at is they typically try to bring Christianity down to the lowest common denominator. Like a lot of political and philosophical progressives really are trying to bring everything down to a low level instead of progressing and advancing. And we'll see what that means as we go along. They deny progressive or regressive Christians deny the inspiration of the Bible, and we'll look at that as we go. A lot of this we're just going to look at as we go along. They don't believe Jesus is the only way to God. In fact, most of them probably regard Jesus as simply just another itinerant preacher, philosopher who just had a few good things to say before he was executed for being a political thorn in the side of the Romans. They reject key Bible doctrines. Now, these are the ones that came to my mind as I was putting this video together. They reject the virgin birth. And there have even been some that have said that they think the virgin birth was probably concocted to cover up an illegitimate birth. They reject the resurrection, the physical resurrection. They'll try and weasel around this and make it some sort of spiritual thing. They reject the atonement Jesus made for sin, and they reject biblical morality, such as what marriage is and that sort of thing. And then there's some that don't even believe in God. There's at least one I'm going to profile and talk about coming up that doesn't believe in God at all. Came out of the atheistic closet about 6 or 7 years ago, and somehow managed to keep her pastoral job with her church. But for today, here's what I want to look at. I want to look at this article by Dr. Krieg, what the disciples believed about the resurrection of Jesus. And this is his vitals, his academic qualifications, including his book, What to Believe, The Questions of the Christian Faith, and The Void and the Vision. He's a professor, pastor. He doesn't meet the biblical qualifications to be a pastor because he's not looking out for the flock or tending to the sheep properly. He's more of a wolf in sheep's clothing, like most of these regressive Christians are. But let's have a look at his article. And it's available on the website Progressive Spirit. He says, we don't know when Jesus was born, but we do know when he died. His birth was linked to existing pagan festivals celebrating the winter solstice, but his death can be dated relatively specifically and occurred during the Passover festival, Jerusalem, early April in the year 30. We don't know when Jesus was born. And anytime I preach on Christmas or Easter themes, I always put the disclaimer in there. We don't know when he was born, probably between about 4 and 6 BC. The putting the crucifixion in the year 30. Okay, I'll give you that one. He was 33 when he was crucified, and being born between 4 and 6 BC, the year 30 is at least in the ballpark. So we can put it right in there, and we know the Passover comes in typically the spring of the year. The Jews and Muslims both use a lunar calendar based on the moon cycles and not solar like we do. So that's why Easter and Ramadan, and Passover, that's why they're moving targets, basically, is they're more based on a lunar cycle. Let's see. According to the narrative, he arose from the dead 3 days after he was crucified, a day we call Easter, a day celebrated around the world, not by all, but by many. It behooves us as best we can to review the pieces of the puzzle as we seek to understand historically what really happened. That is to say, setting aside any analysis of statements that presuppose some sort of faith. What can we say about what the disciples described as their experience? We investigate through the eyes of a secular historian and seek to understand what happened to the disciples of Jesus. He is approaching this with an angle. He wants to set aside any analysis or statements that presuppose some sort of faith, and he's turning around and doing exactly what he says he doesn't want to do here. He's coming at this from basically an atheistic, skeptical, non-believing viewpoint, and I'm not going to make any bones about it. I'm a believer. I'm coming at it from that viewpoint. Now, there are 7 facts that shape the understanding. We're going to go through these. We have no direct or conclusive evidence of what the disciples experienced when they were with Jesus. At first, there were only oral reports that were gathered into narratives collected in various cities and then written down for use in church liturgies. The earliest of these documents dates from about AD 70. Well, here's a statement from William Albright that takes issue with that. Not that Albright wrote specifically about Krieg's position, but Albright says, we can already say emphatically that there is no longer any basis for dating any book of the New Testament after about AD 80, 2 full generations before the date between 130 and 150 given by the more radical New Testament critics of today. Elsewhere, Albright has said that, in my opinion, every book of the New Testament was written by a baptized Jew between the 40s and 80s of the first century, very probably sometime between AD 50 and 75. And in his book, or his commentary on the Gospel of Mark, William Hendrickson mentions a fragment of Mark chapter 6 that dates from approximately AD 50, which would have been very close to the original date. Mark's considered the oldest of the 4 biographies of the Lord. Now, some of these dates are controversial. And this is one of them. There are some that place it later, but it can be dated as early as AD 50. And then this is a portion of what's known as the Magdalene Papyri. This is a section of Matthew chapter 26. It's been dated as early as the last third of the first century, so between about 66 and 99 AD. Now, there's controversy again about this one. But here's the thing. If this particular fragment can be dated and is from 66 to 99 AD, that puts it very close to when Matthew wrote his original. And I've speculated, what if whoever made this copy actually had the original in their hand? And to me, that's just sort of interesting, sort of cool. But this is a fragment, and it is kept in the Magdalene. It's kept in the Magdalene College at Oxford University. That's where it gets its name from, the Magdalene Papyri. It's very small. I think it's just a few inches. I don't have the exact measurements here. There is a fragment of John's Gospel from chapter 8, verse 32 out there that dates from about AD 100. and it is about the size of a credit card. And that is one, again, if the copy dates to about AD 100, that means that the original had to have been written sometime earlier than that, just like with this Magdalene Papyri. So let's look at his facts 3 and 4 together here. The document that we do have that possibly offer information about the historical Jesus are 6 in number. There's the Gospel of Mark, which Matthew and Luke used in part as the basis for their Gospels. A second source referred to as Q, which along with Mark also formed the basis of Matthew and Luke. Verses peculiar to and found only in Matthew, which are he labels as M. Verses peculiar to and found only in Luke are L. The extra canonical, that's always a word I had a problem pronouncing. Non-biblical documents known as the Gospel of Thomas, the reliability of which many scholars put on par with Mark, Matthew, and Luke. Perhaps some sections of the Gospel called John. Paul, whose various letters are the earliest documents of Christian writings, offer no information on the historical Jesus, or about the historical Jesus. Fact 4, and I should, again, air quotes, significantly, 2 of the sources, Q and Thomas, have no account of the empty tomb. Equally significant, the other sources account for the empty tomb. Mark, and then M and L, Matthew and Luke, all differ from one another in the details of what supposedly happened. Well, here's the Gospel of Thomas, the opening of the Gospel of Thomas. And the first line in it says, "These are the secret words which the living Jesus spoke, and Didymus, Judas, Thomas wrote them down." Now, this gets into how the New Testament was put together, the New Testament Canon. And canon is a word that means measure. And there were various tests for the New Testament books and how certain ones got included and some got left out. The notion that Constantine and the Council of Nicaea put all this together is really way, way, way overstated. By the time Constantine came around in the late 3rd, early 4th century AD, the New Testament canon was pretty well settled by then. And most doctrines were settled, but there, like anything else, was controversy. And so he called this council together, and his legalization of Christianity was really more of a political thing. Whether or not he really converted to Christianity, I think, is an open question. He continued on in some of his pagan worship and some other things after his alleged conversion. So I think it's at best an open question whether or not he actually ever became a Christian. Anyway, looking at the Gospel of Thomas, there's no way that the person we know as Doubting Thomas, the disciple, the apostle of the Lord, there is no way he could have written this unless he lived to be very, very, very old. This particular gospel dates from the about 200 AD, early 3rd century, late 2nd century. So there's no way he could have written it. It might have been written by somebody named Thomas, but it wasn't written by that particular Thomas. Now, here are some passages we're going to look at, because this also, I think, flies in the face of this so-called Gospel of Thomas. In John chapter 18, when Jesus is on trial, he says to Caiaphas, the high priest, Jesus answered and said to the high priest, "I have spoken openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues and in temples where the Jews always met, and in secret I have said nothing. Why do you ask me? Ask those who heard me what I said to them. Indeed, they know what I said." But then let's put this next to what this alleged gospel says. These are the secret words of Jesus. So which is it? Did Jesus speak openly or did he speak secretly? And that's the problem with these so-called Gnostic gospels. They all come much later than the time of Jesus, and they all claim some kind of special secret knowledge that only the initiated have access to, and that is not the gospel. Now, here's some of the tests to determine if a book was to be included in the New Testament canon. And it wasn't just some random, I like what this one says, but not this one, so we're going to put it in, or we're going to have a council. Couple of things we look at. One is the spiritual content of the book. The Gnostic Gospels all relied on secret knowledge and that sort of thing. But what is the actual spiritual teaching on this? And second, in the books or the letters, were they of apostolic origin? Keep in mind, I'm speaking specifically of the New Testament here, not the Old Testament. But was this written by Paul or Peter or James or somebody who was known to be an apostle? And did it contradict a letter or book known to have been written by an apostle or a student of an apostle? And you could even add to this, does it contradict anything in the Old Testament? Because the Old Testament, the new builds on the Old. And without the Old Testament, we couldn't really make sense of messianic prophecies and things, some of the things we have in the New Testament. So does this letter that we have contradict something written by a known apostle? And the book of Hebrews is an example of what I'm talking about. We don't know who wrote Hebrews. Some insist it was Paul. I had an instructor at Bible school who thought it was Barnabas. We don't know. And let me just throw this in. If you look at the first couple of verses of chapter 2, I personally think that it was not an apostle who wrote it, based on the wording there. Now, it's obviously an inspired book. I don't doubt its inspiration. I do believe it belongs there. I just don't think it was an apostle who wrote it. And then, was there a wide distribution of a given book? Did it get out into all over Asia Minor and throughout or Europe and wherever the churches were at that time, or was it kept? That's another thing about these Gnostic Gospels. They didn't get quite the circulation that the accepted canon did. And then as for this Q source that Krieg mentions and many other mentions, here is the interesting part about Q. It's never been proven to exist. This came about in the late 1800s, early 1900s in Europe. And Q comes from the German word for source. The German word for source starts with the letter Q. And off the top of my head, I don't remember what it is, but that's where it comes from. And the idea is that, and this is a very, 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 very watered down, simplistic explanation of Q. But the idea is that Mark and Q are kind of the original Gospels. Q was where they got their sources from. It was probably written in Greek, but it's disappeared over time. Yet there are still people who insist that it is a source. No fragments have been found, no full manuscripts, and so this alleged source just somehow vaporized and disappeared. And then he says Paul makes no reference at all to an empty tomb, but instead speaks of the post-crucifixion new life of Jesus as a spiritual body raised from the dead. Well, let's have a look and see what Paul had to say. 1 Corinthians is one of his earlier letters, and in chapter 15, he says, "Moreover, brethren, I declare to you the gospel which I preached to you, which also you received, and in which you stand, by which you also are saved, if you hold fast that word which I preached to you, unless you believed in vain. For I delivered to you, first of all, that which I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he rose again the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he was seen by Cephas, then by the 12, and after that he was seen by over 500 brethren at once, of whom the greater part remain to the present, but some have fallen asleep. After that he was seen by James, and then by all the apostles, and then last of all he was seen by me also, as one born out of due time." So you notice here that Paul says, let me back up here, the greater part remain to the present. 500 witnesses saw Jesus at one time. Most of them are still alive when Paul wrote 1 Corinthians, and that's about 20 years after the resurrection. So he's got witnesses, basically, he's appealing to, and there is no record of any contradiction of what Paul said. Hey, wait a minute, Paul. Whoa, hold it. Stop. I was there. I saw him go in the tomb. He never came out. In fact, come here, I'll show you. The tomb is right here. But there's no record of that. And then you also have to notice that Paul says that he received that Christ died. He received it. Someone gave this to him. It wasn't just something that Paul made up. And that he was buried and that Jesus rose the third day according to the Scriptures. That's Jesus' own words right there, that he would rise the third day. And then let's look at, I have fact 5 here highlighted. It should be fact 6. The crucifixion of Jesus did not destroy the commitment of the disciples to their Lord. In fact, they became even more dedicated to the mission of spreading the newness of life that they had discovered because of Jesus. What newness of life? If he's still lying in a tomb over there in Palestine somewhere, or Judea, or there's no newness of life. In fact, as we're going to see here in just a minute, the Gospels flat out contradict what he says. But because let's go on to fact 7. Despite the fact that there were thousands upon thousands of crucifixions committed by the Romans, archaeologists have discovered only one intact skeleton of a person that was crucified, and that person was not Jesus. That's a fact. There is only one that I know of, and that just shows the brutality of crucifixions is what it does. But he says the last fact indicates that from a purely historical perspective, Jesus, the troublemaker, like thousands of others, was crucified and left hanging on the cross. There was no tomb, but aside from the manner in which the Roman crucifixion was carried out, we can also look at the resurrection narratives from a perspective internal to the young community. Focus on the fact that two of the primary sources for knowing anything about Jesus, Q and Thomas, have no reference to an empty tomb whatsoever. The takeaway is that the empty tomb was not an event that the early disciples experienced. We need to understand why this is so, why it is that the resurrection of the resuscitation of a dead body who left the grave was not integral to the story developed by these disciples. Imagine Jesus walking around the villages and countrysides of Galilee. He is a powerful personality. He teaches, criticizes the power structure that dispossesses the poor, and he continually flaunts the social code. Some people are attracted to him, some of whom become his disciples. Some of those disciples stayed with him. I will refer to these as the stayers, and some moved on. I will refer to them as the movers. But all of them felt that they had discovered in him a new awareness of who they were and who God was. Those who did not remain with him did not witness the crucifixion. And so when the thought was later put into the written form of Q and Thomas, the cross and the empty tomb did not appear. What happens to these disciples, what changed their lives, happened while Jesus was still alive and with them, showing them a new perspective on life. The disciples who did remain with Jesus, about 25 women and men, were also encountered and felt awakened to a new life while Jesus lived, the only difference being that they chose to stay. So what we find, both among those who moved on and those who stayed, are people profoundly affected by Jesus, embodying a new lifestyle that did not falter, no matter their circumstances, and which carried on throughout their life. And contrary to everything we've ever been told or believed about Easter morning, the empty tomb and a resuscitated Jesus were not part of the disciples' experience. But what they did claim to have was the Spirit of Jesus in their midst. Their spirit was that Spirit was with the movers even while Jesus was still alive in Galilee and Jerusalem, and the Spirit was with the stayers even though Jesus had been crucified. Both groups claim to have experienced a new type of being in their midst, a type described by Paul as a spiritual body, a reality beyond description because it was beyond understanding. The Spirit of Christ was a mystery that transcends comprehension, but a reality for them nonetheless. If we think of this new life as a resuscitated corpse, we fail to recognize the power of the resurrection belief on the disciples, because if we now take this one step further, the faith that Jesus lives in a new form meant for the disciples that evil and death are overcome. The basic faith that Jesus rose convinced the disciples that evil and death, as epitomized in the crucifixion, have no ontological status. They believe that within the context of reality, death and evil have no ultimate reality. That is the essence of the disciples' faith and the source of their excitement, their confidence, their boldness, and their joy. And that's the end of his article. And this is one of the biggest loads of rubbish I've ever read. Let's go to see what the scriptures have to say. Well, this is 1 week after the crucifixion. Then that same day at evening, being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut where the disciples were assembled for fear of the Jews, that's really the Jewish leaders, the high priest and that bunch, Jesus came and stood in the midst and said to them, "Peace be with you." When he had said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples were glad when they saw the Lord. They didn't get some great new charge of energy and some new insight to life from a dead Messiah. They are in hiding. They think it's over. And so Krieg has got it all wrong. In fact, this, if you can see there, is a light painting behind the text. And here's the painting that I had behind that text. This is an artist's rendition of Thomas putting his hand in the spear hole of Jesus, where the Roman soldier put the spear up into his side to make sure that he was dead. And then in Luke, This is a little bit of a long reading here, but now as they said these things, Jesus himself stood in the midst of them and said to them, "Peace to you." But they were all terrified and frightened, supposing they had seen a spirit. And he said to them, "Why are you troubled, and why do you doubt? Or why do doubts arise in your heart? Behold my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Handle me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones as you see I have." So this idea that Paul was talking about a spiritual resurrection, Jesus right here says, "I have flesh and bones. Spirits don't have them." And then he goes on to say, when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. But while they still did not believe for joy and marveled, he said to them, "Have you any food here?" So they gave him a piece of broiled fish and some honeycomb, and he took it and ate in their presence. "Hey, I'm kind of hungry. You got anything to eat around here?" And they provided him some food. And here's another artist's rendition. And uh, yeah, I know this is from a ethnic standpoint an inaccurate picture. He was not European. A lot of these pictures look European. He would have looked like any Jew who walked the streets of that day, just like the other disciples would have. So here's some conclusions we can draw. Number one, for a scholar, Krieg should know that Q and Thomas are not primary sources. Primary sources are sources who were there to witness the events. There's no way that this Gospel of Thomas is a primary source, since it didn't come around till about 130 or 40 years after the facts. Q has never been proven to exist, so to try and quote it and make it into some kind of reliable source is absolutely nonsensical, almost to the point of being laughable. If Jesus did not resurrect from the dead, there is no logical sense for Christianity to even exist, because it is very clear from what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15 that the bodily resurrection of Jesus is what all of Christianity is based on. And if Jesus was not who he said he was, if he was not the Messiah, if he did not resurrect bodily from the dead, then Christianity is really the greatest hoax that has ever been perpetrated on mankind. When we look at tests for including various letters and books in the New Testament, the Gospel of Thomas was rightfully excluded. It doesn't make the cut. Neither does Q. And then all New Testament books were completed within one generation of Jesus' life on earth, within 40 years maximum. And one of the reasons we know that is true is because none of them reference the destruction of Jerusalem. Jesus talked about that in Matthew 25, 26, in that area, 24, 25. About the city being encompassed by armies, and pray that your flight not be on the Sabbath and all that. He was talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, which happened in 70 AD, when later Emperor Titus had enough of the zealot rebellions and just leveled the city. And none of the New Testament documents reference it, except for Matthew in a futuristic prophetic sense. So, if you are in a church that is so called progressive, really regressive, and does not respect Bible authority, does not respect God's word, get out. Get as far away as fast as you can, because they're not teaching you sound Bible doctrine. They're not teaching Christianity. They're not teaching Christ. Find a church where Bible truth is proclaimed. If you need to do that, send me a note, 2timothy4.2.3@gmail.com. I'll be glad to help you find a church. There's my email there, 2timothy4.2.3@gmail.com. I'll help you find a church. I don't make any bones about it. I'm a minister in the Churches of Christ. That's where I would recommend it. But be very, 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 very careful. Just because it says Church of Christ out on the sign does not mean that they're teaching sound Bible doctrine inside. So go inside, forget what's on the signs, go inside and see what's being taught. Ask lots of questions, think, be critical in your thinking. They should not object to you asking questions. In fact, I've got a two-part video series on what to look for in a church. Have a look at that. Call the minister, the elders, whoever the governing body is, and ask to meet with them. Don't just walk in Sunday and say, "Hey, can I meet with you after services?" Be respectful of their time and ask for an appointment and bring your questions, because some of these questions you need to ask are going to take a little while to answer. So that's it for this edition of My 2 Cents Worth. What do you think? Leave your 2 cents worth in the comment section below. Comment on these videos, like these videos. Remember to share these videos. And that's all I have for this video. We'll see you in the next one. I'm out of here.